The bats stay silent in today's ball game for the St. Louis Cardinals as they drop their third straight in Queens, New York. This one a 3-0 final against the New York Mets, who seem to have everything working right now. And it seemed like the Cardinals did going into the series. Things were moving in the right direction with back-to-back series wins against the Houston Astros and the Philadelphia Phillies, but they have unfortunately dropped the first three in this 4-game series against the Mets. This is the Cards Hub Postgame Show. He is Chris Pelikan. I am Ethan Hannaford. We are pleased that you are joining us here on Sports Hub STL. Just a reminder that the Cards Hub Postgame Show is sponsored by Hot Shots here on Sports Hub STL and presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Chris, just to start, give me your brief general thoughts on what you took away from this afternoon's ball game.
Yeah, Ethan, I mean, Matthew Liberatore was fantastic. He did everything he could, with the exception of a couple of tough pitches to Juan Soto and Pete Alonso early in the game to give this team a chance to win. So, if we're looking for good things, there's no doubt that what Matthew Liberatore showed today was a bright spot. On the bad end of this, you and I have talked a few times about this. A lot of people had suspicions about different portions of this team. The rotation was one of them. So far, those have been not founded. They're unfounded. The rotation's been fantastic to start the year. There was questions about this lineup, obviously, right? There was very little established slug, very little established, just production is probably the best way to put this outside of Nolan Arenado and maybe Wilson Contreras. And for the first 20 games of the season, looked like that might have been unfounded as well. Since they went up to Queens, it's looking like this is what a lot of people were worried about.
How odd is it that the Cardinals, it seems like it's almost been a tale of two stories. They've played so well at home. They've looked so competitive. They're doing all the things right? The offense is doing the things. Even when, you look at the splits from the first 10 games of the season compared to the last 10, the offensive numbers are much better at the start, but they looked good in their last homestand as well offensively. It's been a completely different story on the road. They're 1-8 now in road games. I feel like it's still early enough to where that's just a freak outlier, but it is true that the Cardinals, the at-bats, the quality of at-bats, while they're not terrible, the biggest stat number, probably if I had a number for it, I'd be curious what it was, but runners in scoring position, it seems like they've really struggled in that stat on the road.
Yeah, well, I mean, today 0 for 8, right? Not going to win games when you do that. So, that's offensively where it's at. And now we got to start looking at piece by piece, what's going wrong with this group right now. And you know what? I mean, give them credit. Kodai Senga was dialed in today. They fought enough to get him out of the game in the 6th inning, right? So, gives you an opportunity, right? You got to get into that bullpen. The Mets bullpen has been solid most of the year. They were solid again today. Having said that, we can be happy with the fact that they were working counts well enough and doing enough to get Kodai Senga to almost, 100 pitches by the 6th inning. Having said that, I mean, they got 3 hits and they didn't hit the ball particularly hard, and every opportunity that they gave themselves by working walks and doing different things when you're not hitting the ball well, sometimes you got to do different things to get on base. And they were doing that today, but they had multiple opportunities to cash those in and just could not do it the entire day. I mean, I think if we're honest about this game today, I think the Cardinals had more opportunities to get runs in than the Mets did. The Mets just capitalized on almost every one of their opportunities, and the Cardinals capitalized on none of them.
Adam Wainwright said something at the end of the game, and our friend in the chat, John, bringing something up, talking about how right now the Mets are just the better team. And
I disagree with that.
We talked about this even before the show today. This Mets team, I think they're doubling the Cardinals in payroll. I mean, it to a certain
more than doubling, I think, Ethan, 3 times probably close.
Well, there you go. You're only helping the point even more, right? Is that how do you compete with that to a certain extent, right?
Well, and especially when their superstars are playing like their dollar values would indicate. Francisco Lindor has maybe won a couple of these games. I mean, he didn't hit real well today, but defensively, he made a play on Burleson late in the game that could have saved 2 runs. And, earlier in the series, I mean, obviously hits the walk-off in extra innings. And, this guy's playing like a $35 million a year guy. Pete Alonso at this point in time, like we were talking a little bit about off camera, Pete Alonso is mad about the way his contract negotiations went this offseason. He is playing mad. He is hitting the ball hard. He is hitting the ball to all fields. Juan Soto is starting to get hot, which is unfortunate that it's happening against the Cardinals. So, you look at the top 3 in that lineup, and I mean, right there, you've got well over, $100 million in payroll between 3 hitters. And those 3 hitters have been the difference in this series for the most part. So, that, and obviously the Mets pitching has been really, really good. And you and I were texting about the ghost fork today, and
what a pitch.
You talk about a pitch that the Cardinals just did not. I mean, I'm sitting here and I really want to see Nolan Gorman take the next step this year. And boy, he looked lost today. And, again, I think good hitters look lost against a pitch like that. But again, this team that went their first 10, 11 games, scratching out 10 hits every game, they got 3 today. And they didn't hit the ball particularly hard. And the truth is they haven't hit the ball particularly hard in this series. So, I hope that what we saw in the first couple weeks of the season is going to be what this team is offensively. I hope it's not the rest of the league's adjusting to some of these guys, to Victor Scott, to Brendan Donovan, who's, I guess, was his 13-game hit streak, came to an end today.
14 today,
Yep. So again, I mean, it's the doubters have every right to start doubting a little bit, because this series has been a really, really good indication. They have gotten pitching good enough to win all 3 of these games. Their offense has just been absent.
Well, let's talk about that pitching a little bit. Matthew Liberatore ends up putting together a stellar line today, 6 2/3 innings thrown, 6 hits allowed, 2 earned runs, both of them coming in 1 inning, just 1 walk, only a second of the season, 6 more strikeouts. What did you take from Matthew Liberatore's outing today?
It was fantastic. He left a sinker up, I believe it was, to Alonso, and then what was his pitch to
Soto? Was it Soto?
Soto, he left it up, and then Alonso, he hung a curveball, to Soto, left a sinker up to Alonso.
Yeah.
2 bad pitches today, cost him 2 runs. That's the difference in the game. Last year with Liberatore, he would just have bad outings, right? Then it started this year. We're like, well, he's got the bad inning complex. And again, 2 runs is not a terrible inning, especially when you followed up with what he did. So, again, a lot of people, I think, were scratching their heads a little bit coming out of spring training about whether Matthew Liberatore had done enough to earn a spot in that rotation, especially with how well Michael McGreevy pitched and you had Mats hanging out there and that sort of thing. Matthew Liberatore has proven through his first, I guess this is his 4th start of the season, that this is a guy who, has maybe some small fixes here and there, try to figure out a way to get it, to not have those couple of bad pitches here and there. But I mean, how can you not be pleased with what you saw from Matthew Liberatore today? His stuff looked electric.
When we know if Matthew Liberatore is on, if his fastball, the velo is up, and the velo's been solid this year to start. But the reason that we know that is because when his fastball is working, it sets up his slider so well. And he is clearly, and I think the biggest difference between him this year and last year is his confidence in, I guess as a starter, I should say, is his usage of his slider. I mean, it's becoming his best fit pitch by far and far. Today, he threw it 40 times today. 40 times. We just continue to see the numbers climb for how aggressive he has been with that pitch. He got 23 swings on it today. 7 of them were whiffs. I think he had 10 in his last outing, 10 whiffs on that pitch. This is a pitch that's really working for him. And we're starting to see it progress as one of the better pitches in baseball.
And it, what stood out to me about that slider today was how good it was against the right-handers. He just kept burying that thing, and they were swinging over the top of it. The funny thing was, I mean, some of his I'd say that his worst at bats today were against lefties, where he was throwing the slider and they weren't biting on it and that sort of thing. But again, I mean, it was always the thing, right? When they traded Arozarena and they got this kid, 1st round pick of Tampa back in whenever it was. And, you knew he was big and the arm was plus and this and that. Right. And so here he is, he's 26 years old at this point in time, I believe. Might be a little bit younger than that. But I mean, point being, it's taken him a little bit to find his rhythm, which is completely acceptable. But here we are, and if he can fine tune some of the things, maybe the command helps a little bit. I mean, he walked one guy today, I believe, right? So again, it wasn't a real big problem for Liberatore today. Again, he just made 2 bad pitches to 2 good hitters, and that was the difference in the game. With other teams, sometimes the offense can bail out a mistake or two. Today, there was no margin for error.
When you look at who the Cardinals had going into these 4 games, I think that most people were probably pretty confident that you were going to be able to get wins in at least 2 of them. You got Sonny Gray going tomorrow, the way that Matthew Liberatore has been pitching of late. I mean, even Andre Palante has been exceptional to start off the year. He had a little bit of a off start for him, but still the line wasn't awful. I think 6 innings, 4 runs. And as you mentioned, the hitting just has not been able to come through. And these guys aren't necessarily world beaters that the Cardinals have been facing off against here in these last couple of games. Griffin Canning, I know Senga was solid today, but it's not like we've talked in even going back to last week how well the Cardinals have been hitting against some of the best pitchers in baseball. But you throw out guys that haven't had that.
Don't have the name value, right?
Haven't had that name value. And it has been interesting how the Cardinals have struggled against some of those guys a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, when you looked at this series, and it was the same thing when we talked about the Red Sox series, right? Like it was one of these deals where like you got Hunter Dobbins coming up and they can't hit him. I don't really know what it is, when you're hitting Paul Skeens well, when you're hitting Aaron Nola fairly well, when you're hitting Zach Wheeler fairly well, and then again, I mean, I looked at the way this series stacked up and you had Griffin Canning and David Peterson in your first 2 games. I mean, Senga has been really good this year. There's no 2 ways about that, but I was like, I thought they had to take at least one of the first 2. That doesn't happen. Tomorrow you got Clay Holmes, who's got another kind of just pitch that he's got that kick change that has been really, really tough for people to hit this year. And, I mean, we're looking at this thing and I'm going like 4-game sweep in New York is not going to look real good. A team that needs confidence isn't getting it right now. And, I don't really know where they go. I mean, we can sit here and you and I have talked a lot about the slug on this team. And right now, I mean, no one's really talking about how Alec Burleson hasn't done anything for this team. Yeah. He's slugging 300 right now. This is a guy who you thought was going to be pretty consistent, a guy who puts up, he was never going to be a guy who's going to hit 40 home runs, but you always thought Burleson was going to be a guy who's going to be a 270 hitter with a 350 on base, who's going to hit 35 doubles a year. And, he came up in a big spot today and Francisco Lindor made a great play against him, but Burleson is not driving the ball right now. Like this is an issue, Nolan Gorman, again, I don't really know what to do with him at this point in time because it's like, it seems like this was a bad idea for him to play today against a guy who's got a pitch like Kodai Senga and the Ghost Fork. That pitch just demolished Gorman today. He wasn't ready for it. So I don't know if it was smart for him to be playing today. Maybe you got to run him out there against guys who don't have the same repertoire, or have some of these great pitches that they see in baseball these days. But, I just don't know. And I think it shouldn't be surprising because, again, I think we were hopeful that this team would be consistent offensively, but there's not a ton of track record. And I think, again, with Wilson Contreras playing as he has to start this year, that's been tough. Arenado is clearly a declining offensive player. So you needed all of these young guys to take a step forward. Donovan looks like he's done that. Beyond that, I mean, Victor Scott is better than he was last year. I still don't know if, he's ascending into, whatever level we want him to. Jordan Walker's been good, not great. Gorman started off pretty good, hasn't been fantastic since he came back from the hamstring injury. I mean, I don't really know where they go is the sad truth about this, because I just don't think offensively that we are seeing enough of these guys go to the next level. And I worry we will see a lot of games like this year that they just don't put anything together offensively.
He is Chris Pelikan. I'm Heath Hannaford, and this is Cards Hub Postgame. The Cardinals dropping a 3-0 ball game today against the New York Mets. I want to get to a couple of messages here in the chat, and I think that this is an important one to bring up because, we're talking about, some of the frustrations, why is Gorman in there today facing a guy like Senga? And I think that this comment in general summarizes summarize it. I think gets us back to pre-opening day, what this team is. Nick saying, I think people are losing sight of what this season actually is. This is an experimental season. This is not a team set up to contend with the Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, etc. Experimental is an interesting word, and I see it, right? Because, this is the year where obviously the goal is always to win as many ball games as possible, but the Cardinals recognize that they are not competing with the Los Angeles Dodgers, with the New York Yankees, with the New York Mets, right? But this is the season where you have to start figuring out what you have in some of these guys, and Nolan Gorman is a perfect example. The Cardinals have historically these last couple of years platooned a lot of these guys. And when you have this many lefties, you can't put out 5 lefties against, a lefty pitcher out there, right? No. But the problem is that has forced some of these guys to not get nearly enough lefty batters to get at bats against these lefty pitchers. And that is a problem. And I think that we've seen that in the last couple of years from Nolan Gorman. His numbers against lefties are pitiful. And I think that, this is a year, right? Obviously, Kodai Senga, let's start with this. He's a righty, right? So this doesn't necessarily apply to him, but just the style of pitcher that, a guy that maybe is going to draw a lot of issues because of the style of his pitching. We saw that happen today, but you have to be able to give these guys opportunity to see that kind of pitching if they're going to be able to consistently face it and have success against it at some point. I think this is a good comment from Nick, and I think that perhaps fans, because of how well the team had looked these last couple of weeks at times, started to maybe pull away from that a little bit and say, no, this team could do something. No, don't get me wrong. You never know if this team could sneak into the playoffs and get hot at the right time. You never know. But I think that these last 3 games have been a good reminder of what this Cards team and where they are at in general.
And I don't disagree with any of that. I think it's just a little bit more, the disappointment stems from the fact that we are hoping to see these guys take the next step. And, when Gorman goes 0 for 4 with 3 Ks, especially 2 of his bats coming up, when there were situations where he could have, affected the game. I'm looking at his line today, and, so Gorman in the second inning comes up with runners on second and third and 1 out. What's the one thing you cannot do at this point? Strike out. What does he do? He strikes out. Then you look in later on, I guess it was the 5th inning, Sajaysi's on third base with no outs. What does Gorman do? Strikes out. So, we talked earlier about Brant Brown's approach, and home runs aren't hit, they're pitched, and, mistake hitting and having good at bats. And lo and behold, again, you just come up and it hits you with a guy like Gorman that he just, when a pitcher has got decent stuff and a pitch like the Ghost Fork, Gorman is just overmatched. And, the whole team was today quite clearly with 3 hits. But having said that, I just don't know, again, we are hoping to see that this guy is somebody who they can build around. And we are 1/8 of the way through the season. So, there is we don't have our final grade on this thing, but boy, this looks a lot like the Gorman that I think people have said maybe they need to start thinking about looking for a deal to swap for maybe a younger pitcher. There was always that talk with Seattle about trying to they needed left-handed power. Maybe we could sell high on Gorman, but he's a guy who I feel like is just such a bellwether player for this team, because this team is so in need of slug. And when he's right, that's what he's doing. Ideally, this guy is middle of the order. But when you see what he does on a day like today, you're going, how do we make a long-term plan with this guy, being somebody who we rely on? So again, he will get a lot of opportunities. And I'm excited for him to get those opportunities. But we just we're not seeing the progress. Now, again, some people might say he had a 10-pitch at bat. That's progress in and of itself. But, I keep hearing Herm Edwards in my mind. You play to win the game, right? I get that we're trying to see what we've got here. But at the end of the day, they had opportunities to win this game. They had opportunities to win the game yesterday. And that's what's killing, I think, a lot of fans at this point in time, is the fact that they just are not knocking down that door when it's kind of creaking open for them.
Yeah, Nolan Gorman in his last 4 games, 0 for 11. with, let's see, 2, 3, 4, 7 strikeouts. So the last 4 games hasn't been pretty. I mean, you look, he's played now in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games since coming off of the IL. So, it's hard to, because it is such a small sample size from a guy like Nolan Gorman, who in those first few games that we saw him in at the beginning of the season prior to that IL stint, he looked pretty good, but it's such a baby sample size from a guy like that right now that I think that it's hard to jump to any conclusions. It's most definitely easier to jump to the conclusion of he's just not the guy, or he's the same guy, I should say, when you look at what he has been here in the last few games, because of what he has been the last couple of seasons, more so what he was the last year in 2024. So most definitely understand the frustrations for this Cardinals team, who falls today against the New York Mets in a 3-0 ball game, shutout for, I believe, the second time in 2025. Just a reminder that Cards Hub Postgame is sponsored by Hot Shots here on Sports Hub STL and presented by DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code STL Sports. That's code STL Sports for new customers to play $5. Get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
There we go. And now we continue on with Cards Hub Post Game on Sports Hub STL after the Cardinals fall in a 3-0 ball game against the Mets. Third straight loss dropped against New York in Queens here, after the Cardinals had won 4 of 6 against the Philadelphia Phillies and the Houston Astros. I think perhaps another good way to sum up this loss today, Chris, is in a matter of now, 9 games, we have seen both what the Cardinals can be on the high side and what the Cardinals can be on the low side, right? And that was a lot of the talk going into the season, is there's a lot of potential for this St. Louis Cardinals club. They're very young. There's some energy there. There's some guys that have historically had some success on the mound, but there's also some ways that this could get really ugly really quickly. And we've seen that high and that low in a matter of 9 games. And I have to imagine that it's probably going to be some sort of roller coaster like that throughout this season for St. Louis.
Well, and you know what, Ethan? I mean, at the end of the day, this is going to come down to whether or not the starting pitching continues to be as good as it's been, right? If the starting pitching continues to go out there and spin quality start after quality start, with some mild variation, they'll be in a lot of ball games, right? I mean, so if that happens, which is a big if, right? It's looked good so far, but we don't know if they're going to be able to continue throughout the course of the season, going out there and continuing to put good starts together. But having said that, again, I mean, what I think we are seeing is this offense, which many thought would be a question mark. Again, you and I have talked about this. We love Brendan Donovan. He's having an all-star caliber season. But if Brendan Donovan is your third place hitter, what does that say about your lineup? And we know that he cannot continue the pace he's on. I don't see Brendan Donovan hitting 370 this season.
Sure.
He's not going to slug what he's slugging right now. He's going to have a great season. I feel very confident about that. But again, I mean, you need Jordan Walker to slug better. You need Nolan Gorman to do something. I mean, the Contreras thing is interesting, and again, you almost you put him and Arenado in a different category, right? Like, I mean, these are guys who more or less might be trade bait at some point in time if this season falls apart. But, Burleson, like, what are we going to get out of Burleson? Mason Wynn, before he got hurt, had struggled. He was starting to come on a little bit, but, again, we got to see whether any of these guys are going to be consistent offensive performers. And, games like today don't give you a lot of faith, but the early part of the season did, so you can't really write these guys off. I mean, I guess it's probably going to ebb and flow with this team's offense throughout the course of the year, which is why, and I wanted to bring this point up too. what gets real interesting is the Thomas Sajaci situation, because here's one guy, he gets 2 or 3 hits today, a couple of doubles. He's hitting 450 or whatever it is for the year at this point in time. Good position versatility, can play a handful of positions. When Mason Wynn comes back, do you really send Sajaci down, or does Sajaci now fall into this category of young guys who we have to see what we have, right? And at this point in time, I don't know how anyone who's producing at any level offensively shouldn't be on this team. So, again, I mean, if this is going to take at bats away from Nolan Gorman, I guess so be it. If it's going to take away at bats from Alec Burleson some way, so be it. But I just think that this is another guy who doesn't maybe have the pedigree. I mean, he was acquired in the trade for Jordan Montgomery a few years back, and has been playing primarily in the minor leagues. But I mean, like, he goes out there and puts together really good at bats, and I think that if we're really trying to do an evaluation of this entire season, and what do we have in this 23 to 27-year-old age range, especially offensively, I don't know how Thomas Sajaci isn't playing 4 or 5 times a week for this team for the rest of the year. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Well, it's interesting with Thomas Sajaci, because this is a guy that, had, got his feet wet at the end of 2024.
Yep.
And during the offseason, you talked about who are the guys that were going to be the most affected by Nolan Arenado staying with this ball club. It was Nolan Gorman and it was Thomas Sajaci, because they expected him to be in the mix for this team. Here's the thing with Thomas Sajaci. I was an advocate for Sajaci being on the opening day roster. And the reason was that people were saying, well, what if he's not going to get consistent playing time? Where is there an alleyway, in my opinion, for Thomas Sajaci to get consistent playing time on if the Cardinals roster stacks up, if the Cardinals lineup sets up the way it does for the future? Like, in my opinion, Thomas Sajaci's role is perfect for what this Cardinals team needs. They need a guy that can come off the bench. He can play all around the infield, but is going to be a solid piece that you can rely on to play to start a couple of times a week. But in large part, he's probably going to be a guy that you're going to lean on as a bench bat. I mean, where would you have him playing ideally? If Nolan Gorman figures it out the way that the team hopes and expects him to, right? A power guy in the middle of the infield that has 30 home run potential, right? That we've seen it from in bits and spurts. If he ends up being your go-to second baseman most of the time, you have a guy like Brendan Donovan that can play there as well. Mason Wynn's going to be your shortstop just about every day. Third base with Arenado, kind of a weird spot right now, but this is a guy that can play everywhere. I don't see what the point is of sending him back down, especially when he's hitting right now. Michael Ciani, I understand what they were going for at the beginning of the year, but this is a guy, I said it at the beginning of the season as well. He was never going to start games for you. He was going to be used in the 8th and 9th inning solely. Has he served that purpose well? Yes, he has. Is he still better than Jordan Walker in the outfield? Yes, he is. But I think that Jordan Walker is proving himself to be a guy now at this point that is completely different than he was in right field last year. He looks confident out there. He's making plays. Is his jump still on the ball the best? No. Could that get better? Yes, but that's also he's a big lanky guy. He's athletic for his height, but this is a much better Jordan Walker that we're seeing right now in right field. The reason I bring that up is because is the need for Michael Ciani really there as much as you thought it would be at the beginning of the year? I don't think so. And because of how much you need offense right now, I think it makes sense to stick with a Thomas Sajaci rather than a Michael Ciani. I
hope that's the, again, let's go back to original, the entire purpose of the season. Let's see what we have. There is no one in any corner who thinks that Samuel Howe for the win. Pedro Pages at second base. Best comment of the season so far. He wins. But let's, it's evaluation. There's no one in any corner of the Cardinals front office that thinks Michael Ciani is the long-term solution. He's a 4th outfielder. The fact that he played as much as he did last year and played as well as he did was admirable. But this is a guy who's, I'm not going to say a one-trick pony because the defense is great, but his base running's nice. The bat has never played to the level that I think you need a starting center fielder to be at in a good Major League Baseball team. But where I'll come back to this, Ethan, is Thomas Sajaci blocked somewhat? Yes, I know what you're saying. Having said that, we can look at this team and know that there are a handful of guys with multi-position versatility And if Ollie Marmol wants to get creative, he can certainly do it. You've got multiple people who can play first base. Brendan Donovan can play anywhere on the diamond. Sajaci can play most places on the diamond. Lars Nootbaar can play center in the instance you want to give, Victor Scott a day off, and that can slide Donovan to the outfield. We can do these things, and I just think that's what baseball is these days. It's mixing and matching. It's playing hot hands, and Thomas Sajaci, I don't want to pigeonhole him into being a bench bat because I do think, it's nice to have a guy who can play a lot of positions, who'll give you a decent, good, he'll give you a good right-handed at bat off the bench anytime you want it. But having said that, doesn't he have to show that he cannot be a regular before we sort of peg him into that hole? And I will still say this, and I think I said this, earlier in one of the shows, you can sit there with a calendar and you can look at matchups and you can give every one of these guys one day off a week. Be strategic with it. Arenado gets one before an off day every time, right? So he gets the 2 off days in a row. You can go through and figure out a way to get 9 or 10 guys semi-regular at bats, 450, 500 bats. It can be done mathematically. And again, if this season is for evaluation purposes, how are we not going to evaluate a guy who's in his mid-20s, who is hitting 450 through a very small sample size, admittedly, but playing good defense where he is? This is a guy who I think has graduated past potential bench bat to this guy might be a guy that we can build around a little bit. So I really, really hope that you're right, that Siani is the one who goes back when Mason Wynn comes back, which I think could be as early as Tuesday. If my dates are not mistaken on his IL stint, and that we run with Thomas Sajaci a little bit. So that's the hope.
I just don't know where you, excuse me. I just don't know where you find those at-bats for him is my concern. Going into the year, the whole thing was, it was going to be. But Ethan,
I don't want to jump in, but look, Mason Wynn's got a creaky back. I know he's a young guy, but Mason Wynn should be sitting out once a week, just for rest and maintenance. Like I said, Victor Scott is still a young guy who can be, he's a guy who I think you can work in and out of the lineup a little bit, maybe try to find favorable matchups for him so his confidence gets up. He gets a day off every week. At first base, you can first base DH, please tell me, Contreras can take a day off every week. Alec Burleson can take a day off. All of a sudden you've got 4 days in a week where you can get Thomas Sajaci on there just by mixing and matching your.
I agree to a certain extent, but the concern, right, is that going into the year, the question was, how are they going to find time for Burleson and Gorman to both simultaneously play? Those were the two. And now it helps a little bit right now that Herrera is out, but then it's going to become even more cramped up when he gets back into trying to find equal opportunities for all of these guys. And the reason that Herrera comes into that mix is because of he's going to DH some because they're going to continue to give Tatis time behind the plate. So if you I'm not saying that it's not impossible. I'm not saying that Thomas Sajaci hasn't looked good in the early going here of his time up with the big league club. I think the concern is if you throw another guy in there, it's at some point you can find that amount of at-bats for everyone is going to run out. At some point that's going to run out, and there's going to be too many guys that you're trying to do that with. If here's the reality, if Thomas Sajaci continues to hit in the role that he's in, he's going to get more opportunities. But I hope that the Cardinals don't go as fully performance-based in 2025 as they would in like a year that they feel as though they are a contender for the World Series. Because while you are trying to win, you do have to give these guys the runway to struggle and have and figure things out. I think that is an extremely important part of this season. If you don't, I would hate for the Cardinals to be in a spot going into the 2026 season where they still feel like they're asking questions about some of these guys. If you give them the alleyway to struggle and then you figure out what they are, then move on. Then you can move forward. But that's my biggest worry about this season.
Let's just do the math on this one, Ethan. And again, I'm not going to sit here and pull the calculator out, but at the end of the day, if you have the starting 8 and you add Sajaci and you add Herrera and you add Wynn, right? So the 8 that played today, you can, there's going to be, generally speaking, if somebody plays all 162 games in a season, they're going to end up with 650 to 700 at bats. My question to you is, if you'd say we want to get everybody 450 to 500 at bats. Is your evaluation process that much more, is it compromised if everybody gets 475 at bats versus 600? I think that there's a way just to keep moving people in and out, and even use it as mental health days or a Brant Brown day for a guy like Nolan Gorman, who's 0 for his last 11 with 7 strikeouts. You can do these things and not say, I'm pulling you out of the lineup because you suck. No, I'm pulling you out of the lineup because we're going to give you a day. You're going to talk to, you're going to work with Brant in a little bit, more of a fashion. So again, at the end of the day, I really do believe that there is enough for this team to get a lot of guys that 450 to 500 at bats. I think that is where you go. And I think you can make an excellent evaluation on people with that number.
And that's going to be something really interesting to keep an eye on as we move forward through this season. Mason Wynn will be set to return here not too far from now, I imagine. And then, it's still several weeks away from seeing Ivan Herrera back with the big league club. So the Cardinals, there is no doubt whether we are a week ago where the Cardinals are in the midst of beating up on the Philadelphia Phillies and the Houston Astros, or in the midst of being beat up by the New York Mets, nothing has changed in the sense that the Cardinals still have a lot of potential on this roster. There are a lot of young guys that have performed well to start off the season. I would much rather have this 2025 team than what we saw either of the last 2 years, where it's a little more roller coaster this season, but it's still a relatively entertaining product compared to the last 2 years, where you're kind of in this what are we doing right now kind of phase. It feels like there are pieces right now that are going to be able to contribute down the line for the St. Louis Cardinals, and let's hope that we see with some of these guys that are off to slow starts. Nolan Gorman can turn things around. Mason Wynn can get healthy again, and they can figure out how to keep him healthy and off the IL. Same thing with Ivan Herrera. Still a lot of potential on this Cardinals team.
Absolutely. No question about it. And again, I would love to see kind of what I just want to see everybody get a chance. I think that's the long and short. And then we can really make better evaluations in this offseason.
Well, any final thoughts before we go ahead and wrap?
Let's not get swept tomorrow. I know it's a tough task against Clay Holmes and the kick change, but go out there, give me a reason to feel better about the offense than what we've seen so far.
It's a busy day in St. Louis sports. The Blues are underway right now. Last I checked, it was 2-2 after 1 in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So excited for that series, and we're looking forward to having the coverage on all of those games, as well as every single St. Louis Cardinals game, podcasting every single Cardinals pregame as well. So be sure to stay tuning in. Click the subscribe button here on Sports Hub STL so you can stay updated and be a part of the show just as much as Chris and I and all of the talent here at Sports Hub STL is. As mentioned, he is Chris Pelikan. I am Ethan Hannaford. This has been the Cards Hub Postgame Show on Sports Hub STL.